everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity AI, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today I'm joined by my co-host Jason, and we have back on the line Tenacity's own co-founder and chief engineer, Andrew Lake. Welcome back, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Awesome. Well, today we want to dive into a topic we kind of hit on the last time that we had a conversation, which is the idea of context and how organizations want data in their context, and how we see this problem in the world, especially as product managers and co-founders of a startup and people who've built applications for a really long time or built services for a really long time, is that, apps, 99% of the time, they give you data that's contextually about the app, right? That it's in the app's context, or it's in however that company thinks about that data. And it can often be hard to get data in the context of the business. And so very early on in our journey, we kind of heard this feedback. And I think today we want to explore a little bit about what that means. Like, what is an organization looking for? So I guess to start it off, Jason, I'll ask the question first to you, and then I'll shift it over to Andrew. When an organization is building out their FinOps discipline, when they're thinking about even their cloud center of excellence, how should they be thinking about their data contextually and how they allocate costs in their environment? Like, what is it they're looking for? How should they be thinking about this problem?
Well, I think contextually would mean that whatever makes sense to them, right? So, like in our case, it might be by customer, right? That we want to visualize, like, because what drives cloud usage, I guess, is the most important thing. And how do you want to understand how that cloud usage and spend is allocated to different portions of your business in the most effective way for you? So in the case of us, it could be customer. In the case of Apple, it could be product line. You might want to know, I'm just using a simplistic example there, but it could be business unit, product line, customer. It could be multiple of those. You might want to see it in both of those contexts, because certain product lines, if you use Apple as an example, I have a MacBook, iPad, and iPhone. I might want to know not only by my customer what my usage is of these devices, as a simplistic example, but also by product line, what is the usage. So I think it varies business to business, and the most important thing is with this is, one, can I identify the environment in the ways that I want to do it? And if I can't, I need to start there. And then two, once I can identify and organize my environment that way, make sure I'm looking at the usage and cost in the way that's most effective for me.
I agree. Andrew, when we think about how organizations are going to want to divide that up, what's useful to them, How does Tenacity or how should platforms, apps think about delivering an experience that way, delivering data that way?
First off, by the customer's context. I think that's the first and foremost most important thing. And there's multiple ways that might be important to the customer. In AWS, you might be interested in accounts. If you have multiple tenants under your account, you would want to possibly allocate out those accounts and then see the cost by those accounts. But even in our environment, we have a fairly simple environment, I would say. We have a production and development environment, a sandbox. You would want to see the cost by those environments, and that would be a really good starting point. But there's other metrics too. Larger organizations would be going with tags, for instance, because you might be sharing cost across departments. They might have to budget. You might even just want to know which one of your developers is spinning up a bunch of things and tagging it with their name and costing us a lot of money. So in Tenacity AI, we have functions for that to be able to dive into tags and create unions of multiple of these filters to then actually create what we call a view into your environment.
I think that there's, if I were to boil those two things down, there is a set of accountability inside the organization. And when you're building out your FinOps discipline or when you're building out your CCOE, either one, one of your first tasks is to kind of figure out who's accountable or who you want to hold accountable, because sometimes those are two different things. And then being able to take that information and look at, well, what's the metadata that I can actually go leverage in order to create that accountability. That's sort of what we think of as a view or as an allocation, right? And there is so much metadata available to us from kind of an app context. And there's a lot of it we expose to the customer. Andrew, you touched on exactly right. I mean, there's accounts and there's kind of tags and there's a few other things you can look at, services and regions and so on. But when you think about, this rich set of data that's available to us, however a business wanted to think about that context, it would actually be fairly easy to surface whatever metadata they wanted, right? At the end of the day, I think it almost becomes like the richest metadata honestly becomes the tagging strategy of the environment. That's probably or of the company. And that's the first place that I think that an organization wants to attack is hit accountability and then start rolling out a tagging strategy that helps them understand their environment through those tags. Am I off on that?
No, I completely agree with that. And kind of to bring together what Jason said before with allocating out to, multiple departments, I think, first of all, obviously it depends on the customer's use case. So you mentioned services, regions. If I wanted to know, am I spending money in a region that I really shouldn't, our tool will be able to provide you that, which is, deep and valuable insight. But that always depends on the customer, and every customer is very unique in what their usage pattern is. But I think the core approach is kind of a divide and conquer, is I want to allocate costs and know about costs in a certain way. And then you start diving down, because every time I think you take that step down into an environment and you start kind of allocating out those costs, you start to notice little patterns that will then kind of give you the clue that if you wanted to dive into it further, now you would be able to do that. Be it a development account that you're looking at has a spike in a certain month because now you have that information which kind of went under in your total cost. Well, now you can start boiling it down by which service is it that is costing me a lot. Is there some, in AWS, for instance, RDS instance that in 1 month for no reason got spun up and was costing me thousands of dollars? This is all information that maybe at a small organization will get noticed, but especially at a large organization is going to go completely unnoticed unless you have someone or a tool that is monitoring these things.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that over and over in my career. I absolutely agree there.
I just talked to somebody yesterday who explained that same exact problem. I mean, it's like, companies want to give developers the flexibility and the autonomy to go build whatever they need. But historically, that team of people has never been in charge of making sure the infrastructure was optimized, right? So there's a disconnect there in that now we're pushing infrastructure changes all the way down to the application developers, which is fine. That's what we want to do. But we also need to have the process in place to be able to understand when things aren't being optimized in the way that they should, because inevitably it will be. Because now you don't have just a few people managing infrastructure. You now have dozens or hundreds of people. So sprawl is just going to be a bigger thing. And if you look at people are now that the economy's in a little bit of a kind of sensitive area for a lot of people, right? The sentiment is not good. You're starting to see people go, oh, we need to move our stuff out of the cloud. It's too expensive. When in reality, it shouldn't be more expensive, and it's most likely because you have a bunch of stuff out there that you shouldn't be using, and you're not taking advantage of the things because you don't have the visibility into where these costs are going.
Well, and I think go ahead, Andrew.
The thing I'd like to hit on there is no cloud provider is necessarily going to tell you when you're making a mistake or spending more money with them than you really, really have to. Because at the end of the day, they want to make a profit. They're a business and they want to make money.
And I think you're hitting on, we hammer on the visibility issue, quite a bit. But I think you're also you're knocking on this accountability issues that a lot of times cloud management, cloud optimization, just simple operational issues are actually accountability issues in that it's not clear who's accountable to what. And we've sort of in our common corporate vernacular, we've weaponized the word accountability. It actually is not a bad word. People want it. People want to move up in their careers. Well, to move up is actually to be more accountable. That's what that is. But we then use phrases like hold them accountable, which is weaponizing this idea of accountability. I think we have to kind of think in terms when we're building out our FinOps discipline or when we're building out our Cloud Center of Excellence. Accountability is not a bad word. It's a good word. People want it. Let's go find the people who want it. Let's let them be accountable to those components, and they'll surprise you. I mean, I found that throughout my career. When you find the right person who's running your CloudOps or running your DevOps teams that wants to be efficient, giving them the power to do so, giving them the tools to do so, they'll surprise you.
Another thing, just to go back to the allocations for a second and tying this into accountability, is going through your costs with the fine-tooth comb actually reveals a lot more than just the cost and where you're possibly spending too much. It tells you a lot about how you are managing your company, how you're managing your infrastructure, where there are possibly issues, security issues even. And all of these things, I think, are not readily apparent to people when they're necessarily looking into their cloud cost spend. But once you start kind of digging into the data, and like I said, divide and conquer, you start going through, seeing which teams are doing what, there's a lot more, even you could say scary information that kind of gets revealed about your environment. And the patterns in which developers and even, anyone who has executive control over the environment can possibly influence it and create issues down the line that maybe are not very apparent today.
I agree with all that. So coming back to, this ability to create context in the user's view, one of my favorite areas to look at once you sort of have your head wrapped around, well, what's the business context, and let's filter it all down and let's have these views and perspectives into our environment, is this big old bucket that's the everything else. It's the inverse of everything you've allocated out. And so now you have, sometimes in some environments it's the what's untagged, but we like to think of it in terms of what's unallocated. What have I said there's absolutely accountability for? There's all these organizations now that can actually look at this data, optimize this data, they can get the feedback, but then there's this bundle of stuff that nobody knows who it should be allocated out to. What should organizations do? What should the approach be when you finally get to that bucket and now you need to resolve it?
When you get to the bucket of empty stuff?
Go ahead, Jason.
I mean, those
stuff that's not allocated, stuff that's...
Yeah. I mean, not allocated is such a nice way to put it. You know what I mean? Like, that's such a term we use. Like, to put it bluntly, this is the stuff that you have no idea why you're paying for it. That's what unallocated means. This is a group of stuff, and that number can be pretty big in some of the environments that we see, right? So, like, yeah, unallocated it's the word we use, right? Allocated costs, right? It's great, but at the end of the day, this is a list of stuff in which you have no idea why you have it. That's what it is. And so the first thing to do is to start with, figuring out who started it, who created it, whatever the case may be, which we obviously have that data, who created it, when they created it, and all those things. And and figure out what the heck it's being used for so that you can properly allocate it. I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Yeah, one of the other things there, when just to touch on the allocation, when you allocate something out, that's also for whoever is going to be doing cost management after you. Because, man, the amount of times I've seen it now that someone takes over something in an organization and they have no idea what they're doing and they just employ a strategy from a previous organization and completely reinvent the wheel is baffling. And in my opinion, it's a waste of cost and time. And having a tool that does this for you completely removes that need and kind of panic once you get into that situation, because you have a process, you know what you have to do, you're making it ready for whoever comes after, and it's intuitive. It's easy to understand. To jump back for a second to the unallocated costs, though, I mean, it can be something small. There could be a Minecraft server running in your $2 million a month spend organization, which, yeah, or Bitcoin. Well, luckily, AWS does filter those out, I believe, these days. But, you know, people get smarter. Every time you remove something or you make it a little harder, there's going to be a way to evade that. And seeing it under unallocated cost is an easy way to, well, I wouldn't say easy. There might be like 1,000 instances running at $5 or something a month, right? But it should still flag to you kind of a question mark. What is this? What can I do about it? And trying to, once again, identify a pattern and then divide and conquer, figure out what the issue is and take it from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's, if I were to break it down in my head of, you know, trying to categorize what's in unallocated costs, there's kind of three big buckets. There's shared costs, which you know, sometimes we don't think about shared infrastructure, a common database, a common set of storage that maybe we need for data purposes for our application, that we just didn't think in terms of, well, who actually is accountable to that? And so we need to create this category of shared, and somebody needs to be accountable to taking care of that shared infrastructure, and maybe we bill it back out to other folks. Again, something that the tools that you use need to support, you know, that sort of nuance in your environment. The second area I can think of when I think about unallocated is absolutely the waste part that we just touched on. Is there's just stuff that's just like legacy projects that someone started, left the company, the project's abandoned, and it's just hanging out there, and nobody knows what it is, and nobody will touch it because nobody's accountable to it. And I've seen that I've seen that in every organization I've ever been in. That has existed. And then the third category. Thing, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I mean, with the legacy cost, you'll see, I don't know, some beefy large server or EC2 instance, and no one will touch that. Like, why would anyone touch a server that's costing $300 a month? That must be essential to keeping the company running. But then it turns out, oh, wow, someone really just wanted to run 14 game servers on the company budget, you know? And that's all fun until you gain access and things like that. And sometimes you can gain access. I mean, if there's no keys or anything pointing to it, that would be a very clear thing to take a look at.
Yeah. I have even seen that in one organization. But there is, you just touched on something. There is this like inverse reaction to the cost of something that you don't know what it is. So if it costs very little, we have an easy time getting rid of it. If it costs a lot, we suddenly think like, oh my gosh, scratch our head. This has to be important. It's got to
have value.
It's got to have value. It's costing me all this money.
Right.
It must have value. And so it honestly takes longer sometimes to get to the bottom of those components. In what I was going to wrap the thought, the third thing I was thinking of there is that sometimes there is core infrastructure like that's not necessarily shared, that's not necessarily waste, but that is some critical component to an app that people just didn't realize because it's 8 years old, it's 10 years old. It's an idea that's so old and so ingrained that the people who built it might be gone. And that does happen. That happened in the classic data center days, but you could go to something and point at it, and it was labeled, and you could kind of understand based on its relative location and what era it was put in there and why it might be there. Now in the cloud era, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you're really having to do a deep investigation to understand that you missed some component of an app that should be a part of it. All right, I think we've run a little long on this interview, and I think we've dove into the kind of the contextual piece here for when you're building your FinOps organization, or when you're building your Cloud Center of Excellence, how you need to think about accountability, how you need to think about allocating out costs in the environment. Any parting thoughts, Jason or Andrew, before we wrap the show?
None for me.
No, I'm going to stop asking that question because there's never
Oh,
any parting thoughts.
I got one. I can say delete all those little game servers your nephew from like 20 years ago installed.
Or your dev team, because I've been in that dev team. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the show. You're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Head out to Tenacity AI to learn more about the Tenacity AI platform and how it can help your business see context in the way that you want to see it as a business. Thanks for tuning in.